Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Change Your Mind podcast. I'm your host, Kris Ashley. As always, we explore personal development, spirituality, and science. Today, we are going to talk about a subject that is so relevant to me: prenatal and postpartum fitness and body image. But first, a couple quick announcements. If you head to the links in the show notes, you're going to find a lot. You will find a link to sponsor the podcast. You will find a link to my book, Change Your Mind to Change Your Reality. It was endorsed by Marcy Shimoff, Bob Doyle, Michael Beckwith, all of whom were on The Secret. It was endorsed by John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, a lot of others. You will find my free masterclass. You will find free downloads. You'll find my course and private coaching. And as always, this podcast is part of the Los Angeles Tribune Podcast Network. We do a lot in personal development. We have some amazing events going on with some huge headliners. We were just doing, I was just on a stage with Les Brown and Sharon Lecter and Dr. Joe Vitale from The Secret. So there's so much going on. Please, please tune in. Hi, I'm Kris. When I was younger, I went through trauma that caused me to feel broken and lost. But my life changed after I had a spiritual awakening. Since then, I've dedicated my life to studying and learning from masters all around the world that have helped me to create a life of fulfillment and abundance beyond my wildest dreams. Now I'm dedicated to sharing everything I've learned so that you don't have to suffer for decades like I did. I've seen people's lives completely transformed, and I share it all right here. Okay, so with me today, I have Tara De Leon. So Tara is a professional trainer, professor of health, fitness and exercise studies, podcaster, speaker, and author. Tara has helped hundreds of women feel badass and confident by teaching them how to lift weights and get strong, healthy, and empowered. Tara teaches women to take up space and to stop apologizing for their bodies. Specializing in fitness for fertility, prenatal, and postnatal fitness, she loves helping moms go from hot mess to hot mom. Tara is passionate about health and fitness and strives to constantly improve herself and better help her clients. So welcome, Tara. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
proud of you. I feel like hearing all those announcements, you have a lot going on and I love it.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, definitely have a lot going on and it's all really fun and exciting. It's great when you love what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, super great.
Yeah, it's just like that old adage, you feel like you never work, right? Because you just have so much fun doing what you do. Especially when you get to serve other people, right?
I mean, I still feel like I work sometimes, but it's
Totally.
definitely
There's the
something I
admin side
enjoy.
of it for sure. Yeah. But that's the stuff that you delegate, right?
Yes.
Um,
I'm a
cool.
huge fan of delegating and learning to say no and setting boundaries. Love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So, I always start my episodes the same way, and that is by asking my guests to tell me their origin story. So, how is it that you came to be a fitness instructor for prenatal and postpartum women?
Yeah, so my story is long and emotional,
That's the
but I
best
will keep
kind.
it
Please
short.
share it.
I've had so many changes throughout my career. So I grew up a little fat kid and I got made fun of a lot and bullied as little fat kids tend to do. And by the way, a note on that, I use fat as a neutral descriptor. I'm not layering that word with judgment. I was just a child living in a larger body and society did not love that. So as I grew up, I actually ended up in the wrong class in college. I was in a class called Sports Fitness Techniques. And at the time, I was a psychology major. So I have no idea how I ended up in that. The internet was not great back then.
That was the universe stepping in for divine intervention, is what that was.
Yeah, right. So that's how I see it as well. It's that course changed my life because one day my professor was standing on his desk, shouting about the Krebs cycle and target training zone. And me, not knowing anything about fitness, was sitting there what is this guy doing? He's so passionate about this. And it piqued my interest. So I ended up changing my major. I majored in health, fitness, and exercise studies. Exercise and sports science is what we called it back then. Um, And then I actually transferred to a different school because it had a better program and also it didn't have any snow. I went to college in Hawaii and it was
Okay.
every bit as amazing as it sounds. And then once I graduated, I'm from Maryland, so I moved back to Maryland, which is a questionable decision. Like, why leave Hawaii if you don't have to? But I did. And then I decided to go to grad school out in Arizona, and I majored in human movement with an emphasis in sports conditioning because my goal was to be a strength coach, right? Like work with professional teams, collegiate teams, things like that to like make better athletes out of everyone. So the reason I got into fitness and training was one, my professor was exciting and excited about it, but I also had terrible body image, right? I grew up, getting teased and bullied and made fun of. And when I got to college, I was a very active child my whole life, right? When I got to college, I met someone who was like, "You should be a personal trainer," and I was like, "Okay, that's a good idea." And like, that's about how much thought I gave it. I was kind of like, "Yes, okay." The secret to like never being overweight again is to like be a personal trainer. Then I will just be like guaranteed to be like super fit for my whole life. Which, spoiler alert, that's definitely not how it worked out. But I actually got into it for the wrong reasons, right? I got into it thinking I would just be like, a super ripped goddess for the rest of my life. And then once I was in it, I realized I love helping other people. And so many times I see people walk into the gym and it's uncomfortable, right? It's a scary place for some people. It's dark and dingy, and the music is loud and it's dirty, and people are grunting and sweating, and weights are clanging. Like, I completely understand how this could be kind of a scary place to enter. And then you go in and you don't really know like the hierarchy of like, well, who has the right of way and who gets to use what machines and, things like that. So it's hard to keep going once you've made the decision to be in there until you learn how it kind of works, right? I don't drink coffee, so going to Starbucks is, like, super overwhelming for me because I don't understand the sizing, I don't understand the difference between all the coffees. I usually, like, walk in and I'm like, and find something, like, really quick off the menu and get out as quickly as possible because it's a place that I'm unfamiliar with in general, right? The gym is that place for so many people. So once I got into it, I realized I actually love this. I love taking people by the hand and kind of guiding them through the gym and getting them comfortable there and helping them on their journey, right? But I still had this like lingering thought that I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach. So I left personal training, I left teaching group fitness, and I decided to go work at a university. So I spent almost 10 years working at Navy. Right here in my hometown of all places, which was amazing. Loyola University in Baltimore, and the University of Maryland in Baltimore as well, and a private facility type place. And it was great. I learned a lot and I loved the athletes, but it definitely wasn't where I felt like I was at home. Like the career was good, the pay was bad, the hours were bad. And I started thinking, like, hey, I'm at a point in my life where I want to start a family, right? I want to have a career, but also not just my career. I want more than this. And with the pay scale that I was at, that wasn't feasible. Then with the commute time that I was at, that wasn't feasible. And eventually I quit my job as a strength coach. I started working at the gym that I still currently work at, and I bought a house all in the same day. So it was a
Nice.
crazy weekend. And when I started at the gym, some of my like body image fears kind of crept back in. Like, I don't look like a typical personal trainer, right? I'm a plus size human being. What if people won't buy training from me because they're like, oh my God, she's overweight? Like, what could she possibly know? And I was worried about if people would want to listen to what I had to say, even though I had all this education and like 15 certifications and, 2 decades of experience. I was nervous. And turns out my fears were unfounded, and that I started working at the gym and I very quickly became busy. And I love what I do, and I love helping other people on this journey. And where I've kind of shifted over the years is back in the 90s and early 2000s, we were all about shrinking our bodies, right? We just wanted to be smaller, 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 and no small was small enough. And it never really vibed with me because I feel like people are good how they are. Like everybody's so interesting and everybody has something that's beautiful about them. And, everybody's worthy regardless of what they look like. And so kind of like when Sir Mix-a-Lot came along with Baby Got Back, and J-Lo took, an extra limo for her booty to the Grammys that one year. Like I feel like that's where all of this started kind of like percolating, Shakira's Hips Don't Lie, like that's where this all started. And now that society has fully embraced like being comfortable in your own skin and being curvy is okay, that's when I felt like my time in the fitness industry began to shine, because I'm not going to like tell people they have to be smaller. I'm not going to tell them that they have to earn their food. I'm not going to tell them that they're unworthy of literally anything. I'm just going to help them have better habits to get healthier. And so when that started, I had been trying to get pregnant for a few years already at that point, probably 3 years. And I started researching anything I could possibly do to improve my chances of conception because it had been a long, long, long journey. And I realized there was a lot of things I was doing wrong in the gym that weren't allowing me to get pregnant. And then, of course, I discovered I had polycystic ovaries. So, really, the gym had nothing to do with me not getting pregnant. But there were a lot of
I was
women.
like writing down a note. What were you doing in the gym that made you not get pregnant? And then like next sentence, you like negate it. I love it.
Yeah, so the answer to that question is like if you do really high intensity exercise, think things like Orange Theory and F45, like high intensity interval type training. You can actually like spike some of your hormone levels, like cortisol, things like that, that will actually inhibit you from conceiving if you're doing that on like a super regular basis. So it's not the case for everyone, right? Like obviously there are women who go to F45 that totally get pregnant, but if you're doing this over and over and over, and you're especially if you're on like a calorie restricted diet, like really hindering your chances of conceiving. It didn't turn out to be the case for me. Mine was just like the Lord blessed me with crap ovaries. So that wasn't my scenario, but I do see that a lot at the gym where women are just like going so hard, usually because a doctor has told them, like, oh, you're trying to get pregnant? Lose a few pounds before you get pregnant. It'll help your chances of conceiving, which may or may not be true, right? Like, we don't often look at anything other than BMI when it comes to health, and BMI is like absolute trash and shouldn't be used at all. But doctors will look at BMI and go, "Oh, you're a few, points high on the BMI scale. Lose some weight," and they don't even consider like, "Hey, what are you already doing? Are you already doing some high intensity intervals? Are you already lifting? Are you already walking? What's your diet look like?" They don't ask those questions. They just say lose some weight, and then we all go, "Okay, I better ramp it up." Regardless of where my previous level was. So a lot of those women that I see will already be exercising at a moderate or a high level and then add more onto it. And then that stress cycle that happens, we spike some of those hormones and then conception just doesn't occur. And oftentimes, if we scale it back and we're like, okay, we're going to do moderate weightlifting like twice a week, and I want you to go for walks after work, like people conceive all the time like that. But during that time, I learned all of this because I dove deep into the research on it, and read everything I possibly could because I was trying to get pregnant. And then eventually I did, not because of any sort of workout that I did, but I went to Shady Grove, which worked wonders for me. Um, and during that time frame, I also was learning all about prenatal fitness. And so it was really like inspired by my own story. Like, hey, I want to learn how to safely do this stuff during pregnancy. I don't want to stop exercising because I'm pregnant. So, where do we go from here? And that's kind of like where I learned most of it. So it's been a wild ride. I went
Yeah.
from very much like steeped in diet culture to now I'm like a weight neutral personal trainer who rallies against diet culture.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I saw myself in so much of it, and I'm sure listeners did as well. Um, first question though, have you told that professor how much his class changed your life?
No, I haven't because I don't think he's around anymore. Like back in the olden days when I should have said something, like he was already pretty aged.
Mhm.
And now I'm like, he must be like 90 years old if he's still around. But he
Got it.
actually still holds like a world record in like deadlifting and squatting. So like dude was strong.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, if he was that passionate about it, that's cool that he like walked the walk too.
Totally.
Um, awesome. So, and by the way, I really liked a lot of your story. I love that you said the BMI scale is trash. I was on the other end of that. I was like the scrawny kid that could not gain weight for the life of me. And every doctor's appointment, I would dread it because they would pull out the freaking scale and they'd be like,
Yeah.
here's you. And I'm like, I eat literally more than anyone I know. It's just metabolism. Right.
Yes. Yes.
And it's just like, oh, I would like cringe every time.
Every
And
time, man, like, weight stigma goes both ways.
yeah,
Like, we hear a lot about it from people that are in larger bodies because we encounter it all the time, but people in smaller bodies also do too, and it's, like, never really appropriate to comment on how someone's body looks. You know,
totally.
we
As long
get
as they're
so caught
healthy,
up in
right?
that,
Yeah. Yeah,
and it's
totally.
also none of our business what other people think of our bodies, you
Yeah,
know?
totally.
Like, there's
Well,
no real reason for them to share that with us.
yeah, and I mean when you're younger and before we probably knew better, these were like people of authority, right? A doctor. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, they must know what they're talking about, but it's like, no,
Yes.
I just totally would roll my eyes every time. It's like, okay, like, yeah.
Yeah. The
Um,
BMI scale is so frustrating because it was developed by this guy in France, I believe, named Queyle in the 1700s. So this is like a long time ago. He only used white males who were of sound mind and who were not frail. So he has eliminated everyone except for like healthy white males. And even then, it was never meant to be like a body fat analytic. It was meant to look at like this whole huge conglomerate of factors. And somehow our like current medical system has like latched onto that as if it's like the gold standard. Like it doesn't take any more effort hardly to get one of those scales that does body fat percentage. So like when you go to the doctor, they could actually give you a fairly accurate body fat percentage and then there might be something to say about it. But a BMI is like worthless. If you want to pass your BMI test, you know, you like cut your leg off. I think
yeah.
all of us would agree that's like not at all healthy, you know, unless
Yeah.
you have to for some medical reason, right? But to just fit within the scale, you know, or like I don't even know how you would make it heavier, like grow your hair longer,
Yeah.
right? So that your BMI goes up just a little bit. You
Yeah.
know, like it's so silly. It's so
That's
silly that that's a metric we're using.
I feel like there's so much like that that's so antiquated, just like not even in just the medical industry, just in life, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
but I knew it was from men, but I didn't know it was white males only in a certain age bracket from the 1700s. That's just so
Yeah.
wild.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
that makes no sense. Um, okay, so you also work with postpartum women. So why postpartum? Did you personally struggle with losing weight after or body image after pregnancy? Because like I know that's such a big thing that so many women struggle with. I know for me, and by the way, I relate to your story too, because it took me 8 years to get pregnant and I had to do IVF a bunch of times.
Okay.
Which also made me gain a bunch of weight, which made
Yeah.
me feel super insecure before like for like 3 years before I ever got pregnant, right? From all the hormones.
Yes. Yeah. You feel
But
crazy from all the hormones.
oh god,
And
yeah.
then you're
That's
gaining
what
weight and they're like,
yeah,
"Don't gain any more weight or we
yeah.
can't do the surgeries and stuff." And it's like, "Okay, well, I wouldn't be gaining weight if I wasn't being pumped full of all these hormones." You know, yeah, I
Yeah.
completely understand. It is a crazy journey and I just want to give like love, support and good vibes to everyone on that path cuz it is a roller coaster.
Yeah. But I remember having so much fear about getting pregnant because of body image stuff, which is like an embarrassing thing to say out loud, but it's
Yeah.
so true, and I think so many people feel that way.
Mhm.
So so like what was your own postpartum journey like? And then, I want to hear also like I guess like how women that you've worked with typically feel in their postpartum weight journey.
Yeah, postpartum is super hard. And I don't care if you had the easiest pregnancy of all time and your baby just like, flew out without any pain. Like postpartum is another wild ride. I am new-ish into my motherhood journey. My son will be 4 next month. So like obviously there's mamas that are way more experienced out there to me, but I have this like sneaky suspicion that like the entire motherhood is a wild roller coaster. It's like a little scary to me. Um,
Yeah.
like
I think you're right.
fertility journey was crazy. Pregnancy, labor, and delivery can be a little crazy. Postpartum was really wild. And then toddlerhood has nothing on the rest of that. And then it's like, oh my gosh, what if everything's like this? Um, so my postpartum was a little bit different than many women's journey because it was during the pandemic. So I
Mm.
was pregnant when the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, it was like my husband couldn't come to any appointments with me. We were like literally prepping for a home birth in case our hospital shut down. Thank God that didn't happen because I can't imagine having to have a baby and then clean up your own house. Like, don't put me down for that. Also, not to mention, if I had given birth at home, my baby and I both would have died. So definitely not something that I wanted to go through. And luckily we didn't have to. So postpartum was a little bit stressful, particularly because we had a rough start, right? I just said that my child and I both would have died if we had given birth at home. And it's because he was born not breathing. It is likely that happened because I was misdiagnosed during labor due to weight stigma. It's a whole story that I will not bore you with, but like the cliff notes are, my blood pressure spiked a little bit high during labor. I was having like an unmedicated labor at that point, and I was laying on my arm where the blood pressure cuff was, which you should never do that if you're getting your blood pressure taken. And of course, I was in pain, right? Like labor is painful. So my blood pressure was a little bit high, and they took one look at me and they were like, "Oh my gosh, you are old and fat. Um, you are definitely having preeclampsia." And I was like, "Dude, I've had perfect blood pressure my whole life. I literally worked out my entire pregnancy. Like, let's hold off for now." And it got to the point where I wanted an epidural, and they had like a nurse who it was her first day give me the epidural, which is fine, like everybody's got to learn somewhere, but she ended up scraping the inside of my urethra with the catheter. So I was bleeding and it didn't really hurt, right? Like labor's uncomfortable, so what's the one more thing, right? I didn't even hardly notice what was happening down there, but it made the bag of urine that's like hanging on the side of the bed look like it was brown, even though it was blood in there and not protein. So they didn't test. They didn't go like, oh, let me take this strip and dip it in there and see if this is protein or blood or what is this. They just said, oh my God, it's protein. You need all these drugs to prevent you from having like strokes and seizures. And I was like, well, yeah, shit, I don't want that. Yeah, give me the drugs. I don't want to have a seizure or whatever. So they did. And in my opinion, that is what caused my son to be born not breathing. Um, they do not agree with that assessment, and I'm not a doctor, so, like, I don't really know, but that is my, suspicion based on a little bit of reading that I've done on the subject. So, anyway, he was born not breathing and got whisked straight to NICU. It was fine, he was only there for a couple of days, and he was breathing on his own within, like, half an hour, so, like, everything worked out okay, and he is a vibrant, healthy 3-year-old at this point. But it was a little bit traumatic. And then being the pandemic, like we couldn't go in and out. We were like stuck in that room there for like the duration. And then when we got home, it was like too scary to have anybody over. Like I told my mom she couldn't come unless she isolated for 2 weeks. And she like showed up and mentioned like on the front porch that she had like seen friends for lunch like the next day. And I was like, well, You can't come in if you were with your friends yesterday. And she was just like, oh, but like it was just for a minute. And I'm like, I have like a medically fragile infant here. Like, we're not risking it. Like, sorry. So the village was like non existent at that point. Um, and I personally feel like I dealt with some like postpartum anxiety. But my doctor was kind of just like, yeah, you're a mom. Now you have anxiety, like life is anxious now. um so it wasn't really well dealt with. And I remember feeling like I just didn't have my life together, like strangely, I will say, um postpartum, the baby weight that I had fell off immediately. Like within a month I was down to my like pre-pregnancy weight, which was completely bizarre and unexpected because I'm one of those people where if I look at food I will gain weight. um but I really, like, thrived physically through my pregnancy and postpartum time, but mentally, man, it was crazy. And, you do have all these things changing with your body, like, for me, my breast milk would leak out, like, all the time. So I would be sleeping all night, and then the instant I would wake up, before I even opened my eyes, my shirt would go like, and just be soaked. It was just like, "What the heck?" One time I was out in the grocery store and I heard a baby start crying, and all of a sudden my milk just let down and, like, dripped on the floor, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm, like, leaving bodily fluids on the floor, like, how can I trust my body now?" Um like, a particularly funny story about that is I woke up one day, the baby was sleeping in his bassinet at the bottom of the bed, still asleep, and I had to pee so bad. So I, like, got up, didn't put my glasses on. I'm super blind, by the way, without glasses or contacts. And I went to pee. Peeing was a struggle postpartum. I felt like I had to pee super bad, but it just dripped out like a leaky faucet instead of like a fire hose. I would like listen to my husband pee normally and get like ragey because of it. So I finally peed and then came back to my bedroom and my husband goes, "Babe, don't move." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "There's a spider." And like, okay, I don't love spiders, but I'm not terrified of spiders. But like, I couldn't see anything. So I'm like, "Oh my gosh, where is it?" And he's like, "It's right there." And I'm like, "Well, where? I don't know where that is. Like, I am blind, sir." And I didn't know if it was like descending on me, if it was descending on the baby. Like, I didn't know where this spider was. And so I just like panicked. And while I'm sitting there bursting into tears, I peed myself somehow and my milk let down. And I was just kind of
Oh,
like,
no.
oh,
You're, like, leaking out of every end that you can.
like anything that could have let fluids out, like basically did. And I was just kind of like, oh my gosh. So I like go back to the bathroom, put my contacts in, clean myself up. And I come back in and it's like the world's smallest spider that was like halfway down the wall, nowhere near me or him or the baby. And I was just kind of like, really?
I
But
love that story.
like when
Okay.
working with clients, right? Everybody comes because, they want to feel strong again. They don't really feel strong in their bodies, even though like your body has just done this amazing thing, right? Like you've literally grown an entire human. You're probably making some of the food for that human with your own body, which is like a miracle.
Right.
um you're also surviving. You're like living your life, you're still getting up, you're back to work at some point, right? If you're a working mom, of course. um well, all moms are working moms, but if you're a working outside the home for money kind of mom, then like you're back to work, and society kind of suspects us to just like expects us to just jump right back in and be who we were before we had this baby. But really, like pieces of our baby stay with us forever. Like you are so changed the second that that baby comes out. Like you will never ever be the same. I would argue that you'll never ever be the same the second that like conception happens even. But you'll never be the same human, and that's totally okay and wonderful. But I feel like society just kind of goes like, well, you should still be the same. You should still look the same, still dress the same, still act the same. Your self-care should still be the same. Why are you changing? right? And then we as the mothers feel like, oh my gosh, I'm failing at home, right? Like, am I a piece of crap for putting my kid in daycare during a pandemic? Like, he might die because I feel like I have to go to work, right? Which of course it's okay to do that, right? Like, you can make your own choices and like whatever happens, happens. But at some point, like, it's a decision you have to make, right? Or like, oh, do I quit my job and stay home with my child? Um, and now we don't have enough money for the bills, right? So it's a lose lose. You feel like you're either failing at home or failing at work or failing at both, which I think is where many women are. Um, and by default, we're a lot of like the decision makers. So we're the ones doing the research on, everything. Like, what does safe sleep for an infant look like? What about the vaccine schedule? What about, feeding? How do we get them started eating regular food? I think it's really worth, if I could like make a recommendation for anyone who's pregnant, like have a conversation with your partner before the baby comes about like who's researching what things, because it takes so much mental load for us to like research that and to like stay on top of it. Even like buying diapers. How do you know when your baby's going to be out of diapers? Like, somebody has to like take that task on and go, we only have like 6 left. I should probably order another box. You know? Well, probably you should have ordered it like 10 diapers ago, but at that point, like, somebody's got to carry the mental load. And if in our culture, mostly it's moms. And it's hard because we're not used to also caring for another tiny human that plays the game. I always say my son as a toddler played this game of how can I kill myself every day, and I had to play the game of how can I prevent him from killing himself, and it was absolutely exhausting and draining.
Everything you just said is just so real. Like,
Yeah.
it is just so freaking real. Like, the decisions are also, like, really terrifying. Like,
Yeah.
oh my god, when you said the vaccine schedule, it's just like, oh, like, yeah, I mean, and it's like, you wanna do the best for your kid, and you're like, "Okay, all this research tells me I'm injecting poison into him and could
Yeah.
hurt him. All this research tells me I'm preventing him from getting these horrible diseases, and I'm, like, could
Yeah.
be saving his life." Like, what like,
Yes.
yeah, no,
It's
it's
so
so real.
hard. It's
It's
so hard. I
it's
actually want to do a podcast on like being like scientifically literate. It's because many of us, we're like getting our information from social media. We're not like watching the news and like reading, like research abstracts and stuff. We're like hoping other people read that stuff for us and then write like a little soundbite that they share on social media that we can go like, yes, that is great. That's what I'm going to do. Right. Because we're busy managing like the rest of our entire family's life. So it is super challenging, to be the one researching the stuff and then making the decisions and then staying on top of it. And at the same time, we're like, am I doing enough? I'll tell you another story. This is how, so I wrote a book called Hot Mess to Hot Mom: Transformational Tools for Thriving After Childbirth and Beyond. And this is how the book came to be. It was the morning of my son's first birthday. So the pandemic was still in full swing, right? It's like July 2021. Pandemic is still brutal. And I decided that because I felt like we missed out on anything maternity related, like pictures and a baby shower and anything like that. Like, we didn't have any of that because people were like dying over FaceTime on their iPads, right? So we were like, well, I guess we'll do without and we'll survive. But I was like, I don't want my child to miss out on important things now that he's here, right? I can be disappointed that he was in utero and didn't get these things, but I'm not going to let him be disappointed, even though in retrospect, a 1-year old would not have cared. To me, I cared. So I planned this big party for him. We were going to have all of our friends over for his first birthday. And I was standing in the shower listening to him bang on the door and cry and try to get in and be mad that he couldn't be in the shower with me while I was showering. And I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, so we're gonna put the food on the countertop. I hope I ordered enough. Wait, is the caterer bringing plates, or did I need to get plates? I hope I hope they're bringing plates because I definitely don't have enough, and I don't have enough real plates for everybody. So, well, I hope that'll be fine. And then I was like, I can't believe the baker of his cake misspelled his name. My son's name is Maverick. And she like left out the V. So the cake said like, happy birthday, Mayrick. And I was like, what? And I'm like, at
No.
the time, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you mess up his first birthday cake? Like, get it together. And I thought, like, probably at some point I'll think it's funny and laugh about it, which we've reached that point. It is funny and not a big deal. But at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I messed that up. Even though, was that me making the cake? It was not. I ordered it from a bakery. It wasn't my mistake, but I internalized that as like my failure. And I noticed like, oh man, I need to buy more body wash, add that to the grocery list. Speaking of groceries, I wonder if I need to get this, like my mind was just kind of racing there in the shower. And I looked down and I realized I hadn't shaved my legs in like who knows how long. And I was like looking at my legs and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have got to shave these things. But this is going to be like a multi step process at this point because nobody's razor is like strong enough to deal with the Sasquatch situation we have going on here. And that's when I realized I was like, girl, your child is a year old. You have to get your shit together. And I was like, okay, what does that look like? And what I really wanted was I wanted to be having my life together enough that he had the mother that he deserved, and I wanted to feel like if I just had a checklist of like, what would make me feel like I had my life together? Like, man, if I could work out again. My body didn't feel right postpartum until I was like 6 or 8 months postpartum. you know my pelvic floor wasn't super damaged during labor. Like I had a little tear, but it was just a little one. And yet it took me a long time to feel like my guts weren't going to fall out every time I moved, right? And that's okay. This like 6 week benchmark of like you have to be exercising at 6 weeks, by the way, you're open for business at 6 weeks, is crazy. you know we're doing our mamas a disservice here. um but for me, like being able to work out again was on the list of like, how am I going to feel? Right? Am I going to feel like I have my life a little bit together and that I'm doing me things, right? Like Tara is a person who exercises regularly, but Tara as a mom was just like the birth giver and milk maker and wasn't exercising at all you know? So I wanted to exercise. I wanted to make sure I was getting enough sleep. I wanted to eat something that wasn't carry out most nights of the week. I wanted to like have some time away and have my own hobbies and, like make sure I got his like, Roth IRA or his 529 set up. I wanted to get life insurance for him. I wanted to get like my will and testament done for me so that if something were to happen, like these are horrible things that none of us, especially new moms, do not want to think about that. But I can only imagine how much worse a tragedy is if you don't have any way to pay for it, right? Or if you don't have any plans, like, you and your husband die in a car accident, where does your kid go? Like, that'll get messy if you haven't laid that out. So for me, I felt like, dude, I just need a checklist of like how to feed myself, how to nourish myself, how to nourish my baby, how to make myself feel like I'm a human again and not just the like milk maker birth giver. And so I went online and like researched all this after his party. I was like, all right, let me Google like new mom checklist. And nothing came up really other than like, here's what to buy, which is also important. There were definitely a few baby items that like made my life way easier. But it didn't really exist in the form that I thought it should exist in. So I kind of thought like, gosh, somebody should write that. And then a few months later, I was like, maybe it should be me. And then I had a meeting with my business coach and she was like, what does your perfect day look like? And I was like, sitting on the beach, not being around humans. And she was like, oh, so you need to be a writer. And I was like, well, I do kind of have an idea that I've been thinking about. And she was like, yes, let's do this. So I pitched it to a publisher and she was like, I love this idea. Everybody needs this freaking book, dude. None of us as new moms know what we're doing. None of us feel like ourselves anymore. We all love our children like beyond recognition, and we have no idea how we even have the capacity to love something that hard.
Right.
And it's like a little scary for us, but like we're here for it. But we still deserve to be us as a separate human being. Um, and she was like, but you're not an expert in all these areas. She's like, you got to write about body image, you got to write about fitness, you can do like an introduction, a closing, chapter, whatever, but you need to have like a dietitian talking about fueling your body. You need to have a sleep specialist, talking about how to make sure that you as the mother are getting enough sleep when your baby may not be sleeping, right? Um, you need to have someone write about doing like your estate planning. You don't know about that. And I was like, yeah, I definitely don't know about that. So I basically went and recruited all these people to help me. Most of these were people who I used during my postpartum phase. Um, at one point I had a lady write a chapter and she is like a sexiness coach. That's what I call her. Her actual title is like yoga therapist or something. But she's like a sexiness coach. And I went to my doctor actually, and I was like, hey, so my libido is like gone. When does that come back? And she was like, oh, like when your kid's in college. And then she looked at her notes and she was like, never mind, you'll be in menopause by then. So, like, never. And I was like, this is terrible. I used to enjoy like being physical with people, like I don't want to like never enjoy that again. And she was just like, yeah, welcome to motherhood. And I don't think that's like an acceptable answer. So I went and like looked for other people to help me with this kind of thing, right? And I found Julie and I was like, Julie, you got to help me. And she gave me the most bizarre advice that somehow totally works. And I'll tell you because every new mom should like know this if they're struggling with libido once you're ready for like sexy stuff, not like instantly. She was like, every time you touch or see water, I want you to think of like sexy stuff. And I was like, like what? Like I wash dishes like 48 times a day. And she was like,
So
yeah. She was like, okay, so you turn the water on and you put your hands in it and you're like, ooh, the water's so soft and it's warm, and it's dripping on my hands. And I was just kind of like, okay, uh, I don't know about this. Or like in the shower, you're like getting wet and touching your body and just feeling like sexy, even though you're like leaking milk and you're tired and your leg hair is 4 inches long and there's a screaming baby in the background. Like, I was kind of like, okay, this isn't exactly the advice that I was hoping for, but girl, I'm telling you, it somehow worked. I don't know. I can't explain it, but somehow I was just like, "Dang, okay, I could be into this." You know?
how long did it take to work?
I would say like within a week I was like, "Huh, okay." You
Because
know? Like
when you're breastfeeding, like it is it's like painful actually.
yeah. Breastfeeding I feel like is by far the hardest part of
No, I
like
mean down
early
there it is
motherhood.
painful like to have sex while you're breastfeeding in my
Yes, I also experienced that. Although to be fair, like I got mastitis 4 times in 6 months, which
Ooh,
was awful. I hate mastitis. It is like the worst thing ever.
yeah.
And every time I got it, it would like drop my supply. So I was like done breastfeeding by like 7 months. I was pumping like 4 hours a day to get like 3 ounces, and I was finally like, what am we doing? Like 99% of my child's diet is not breast milk, and yet I'm sitting here for 4 hours a day trying to, like, make this happen. So, like, for me, I didn't do penetration for, like, a long time, you know? We did other stuff, but not that because it was just very unpleasant down there, as you said. But I will say the, like, water thing really worked within, like, a week. I at least was interested in considering it. Before that, it was like, "Oh, you again? God."
You're like, "You don't touch that, that's for the baby."
Right. Like, "I'm over this, thank you." I'm still recovering from many things here, but
So
It
I
was a
love all
journey.
your stories. You're so real and relatable, and like everything. I mean, I didn't even get to comment on your story and like how freaking scary and terrifying and traumatic that is. And just everything you've been saying. I've been kind of like writing down little things, and it just you're just like so hitting it on the head like every time. Um, I really want to get to a little bit of like the fitness and stuff since we only
Yeah,
have like 15 minutes left.
totally.
Um, you mentioned something that piqued my interest, and I'm sure is like everyone else's ears perked up. You dropped your pre-pregnancy weight in like a month. Uh, dropped to your pre-pregnancy weight. What did you do? What happened? And how are you coaching? Like, what's your advice for women in postpartum who are trying to get down to their pre-pregnancy weight? Because let's be real, like, yes, we can tell people they are worthy and they are amazing and they are incredible and interesting and all these things, but sometimes people just want to get to their pre-pregnancy weight so they can fit into their damn clothing.
Yeah,
Right? So
totally.
like how do you what advice do you have for women and how did you do it?
So nobody's gonna like this answer at all, but I didn't do anything. I just like survived. The first month or so that my son was born, it was just like figuring it out mode, like I just stayed home a lot because it was pandemic, right? So I just stayed in my house a lot and I slept a lot. Like I will say I had a miracle child when it comes to sleeping. Um he was sleeping through the night by like 3 weeks. So like I got plenty of rest, which I think was crucial into like getting my healing back on track, to getting my weight back where it was. I think that like the amount of rest I was able to get was absolutely essential. And it wasn't necessarily like all in a row, but like um I would wake up at midnight to feed him, and then he would just go right back down by like 12:20, and I'd sleep until like 4 a.m. and then wake up and feed him again, and he was back down by 4:15. Like it was really, really easy for me to do the sleeping thing. And diet wise, I found that breastfeeding made me like absolutely parched. Like it
Oh,
was
yeah.
almost uncanny. The second I would put my pumps on, or if I was holding my baby, like the first like I was like, "I need water. I'm dying. This is an emergency. I need water right now." Like it
So
was
real.
super bizarre. My husband actually bought me like a 40-ounce Yeti, and he was like, "Get that, yeah, you know." He was like, "Get that thing ready before you start pumping, because I'm tired of bringing it to you." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I'm tired of feeding your child, but here we are." So I drank an absurd amount of water, and I've always enjoyed like fruits and vegetables. It was summertime, so like yeah, we had a lot of fruits and veggies that we would just like munch on. We also had like a lot of snow cones. So I can't really say like, oh, we watched our diet. No, we didn't. We just kind of ate what we wanted to. I do think not being on a solid schedule of like, this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, I probably just didn't eat as many calories as I normally do because it wasn't like working. I would wake up and I would chill, and just knowing that I could eat at any time made me go like, well, I don't need food yet. Like I just wasn't hungry for it. Whereas like my day now is very like structured, right? I'm at the gym at like 7 a.m. So I make sure I eat before I go, and then I don't get a break until like 1. So I eat like a big lunch because I'm usually starving. Um, and then I know I'm not going to eat dinner again until like 6 or 7. So like I have larger meals on a regular schedule. Whereas like being at home with a newborn, I was kind of just like, meh, not gonna eat yet. I'm not really hungry. Like, oh, I'll get a string cheese and a piece of pineapple. Like, I didn't do a great job of fueling my body. And I think that's why I lost the weight very quickly.
Yeah, you're like grazing.
Recommendations? Yeah, I was like grazing. My like professional recommendations for new moms that are trying to like get back down to their body weight would be like drink a massive amount of water, right? Priority number one. Priority number 1 is get enough sleep. Priority number 2 is drink a massive amount of water. And then priority number 3 would be like prioritize protein. So if that means like, oh, you'd have a protein shake a couple times a day and that's like the bulk of your calories, like great. but getting that protein in is going to keep you feeling full for longer. It's also going to help you build muscle or maintain the muscle that you already have. So that would be like really, really helpful.
I love that advice, and it's so easy for someone to just drink another extra couple of glasses of water or something, right?
Yeah.
It feels doable, it feels attainable.
Yep.
So what
A
about
good guideline for that is like half your body weight in ounces.
okay.
Um, and that's if you're not breastfeeding. If you're breastfeeding, like the amount that goes out should be the amount coming in plus your half your body weight in ounces. So if your baby's drinking 30 ounces a day, it should be half your body weight in ounces plus 30.
That's really good
But
to know.
I also wouldn't stress yourself about that. Like if you're thirsty, drink. Like breastfeeding, you're thirsty. There's no doubt that you like want to be drinking something. And I would prioritize water in that case, because that's what breast milk is primarily, like water. So make sure you're drinking lots of water and not a lot of like other drinks.
Yeah. So what about a good what's the best exercise to help lose the baby weight, to help lose the baby's stomach? For me, like it took for the first 6 weeks, like nothing changed on the scale. And I was
Mm.
like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Because everyone's like, oh, just breastfeed and it'll fall away. And then other people were like, if you breastfeed, you won't lose a pound. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to be the later group, right? The latter
Yeah.
group. But I had a C-section, and I think it was, like, that extra recovery time. Because once I hit 6
Yeah.
weeks, it started falling off really fast, and then
Hmm.
the last 2, I've kinda been on a plateau, so I'm like, "What's gonna get me those last 9 pounds so I can fit into my clothes?" Like
Yeah.
what exercise?
So, like, the bad news is that, like, genetically, we're kind of, like, predisposed to hang on to some of that weight until you are done breastfeeding. And the reason for that is, like, if there were to be, like, a famine or something, your body will pull from that fat in order to make sure that you can still produce milk for your baby. So we're kind of, like, genetically predisposed to hang on to, like, a bit of it, right? Just in case of, like, emergencies. Um, so after you quit breastfeeding, it is much easier to lose the fat. I wouldn't say that's like a reason to stop your breastfeeding journey early, but like know that it gets easier once your hormones are kind of back in action. For me, I had like wicked postpartum night sweats while I was breastfeeding, and as soon as I stopped breastfeeding, those went away, which was awesome. Um, so like it comes, but I really feel like new moms should prioritize strength training. And the reason for this is because it's going to help prevent injuries. I was lucky enough to have a Duna stroller, which is like the best invention that's ever been invented for babies, where it's one of those infant car seats, but with the push of a button, wheels pop down and it turns into a stroller. So you don't have to like lug around that awkward infant car seat that's like 15 pounds plus your like 10-pound baby in there, and you're holding it off to the side. So now you're all like tilted and jacked at this weird angle. And I see like a huge amount of women that have like elbow issues, shoulder issues, and lower back issues from carrying that infant carrier. Right. So doing some strength training to make sure that you're strong enough to meet the demands that your newborn places upon you, super, super essential.
Yeah, my husband pulled his back twice carrying that
Yeah,
carrier with the baby in it, so that is so
totally.
real. I've heard strength training also just kind of boosts your metabolism overall to help lose the weight. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. So muscle needs calories in order to maintain itself. Otherwise, it'll just like atrophy over time, right? Will just slowly like deteriorate. And fat on the flip side doesn't need any calories to maintain itself. It's just like a sentient, substance that just is. And if you take in less calories, like you'll burn some, but it's the muscles that are doing the burning of the fat. So the more muscles you can have, the more fat you're going to burn overall, the more calories you're going to burn overall. And I feel like I get this comment a lot that people are really worried about turning into like a bodybuilder or something. And like it takes so much work to build that much muscle. and it usually takes a lot of like supplementation to do that. So, as a new mom, I would very much not worry about getting like too muscular. It also happens really gradually. So if you like look at your arms one day and you're like, "Ew, these are gross. They're muscular man arms." You just stop doing what you're doing and they'll go away within a week. You know?
How many days a week do you recommend doing strength training as a new mom?
Twice.
That's it?
Twice a week for like 20 to 30 minutes is plenty.
Wow. All right. Um, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. I can't believe an hour is already up. I've had to put myself on mute because I've been like cracking up. You're hilarious and it's just so real. Like I feel like you should be a stand-up comedian because it's just you're so relatable and just so many things. Like your story with the spider leaking out of your eyes and your nipples and peeing like to the last 3 weeks of my pregnancy, I had this, like, horrible cold, and I had this horrible cough, and every cough, I would
Oh,
just pee myself. Every
yes.
cough. And
I
it's just
firmly
like
believe that like every pregnant woman ever should go to pelvic floor physical therapy at least for like 1 or 2 sessions just to get evaluated. So there it's like pretty easy to stop like the pee sneeze, but none of us really talk about how to do it. In case you're like experiencing that and you're like, "Oh my god, how do we stop it?" Look up the Girls Gone Strong connection breath. She has a great video on how to do it. Or I have it posted on my Instagram too. So, like just that one simple exercise could like fix the pee sneeze in many people. But I
yeah.
also very much recommend pelvic floor physical therapy because, yeah, I definitely like peed the couch more than once during pregnancy, and that sucks.
Yeah, I'm so thankful it hasn't happened to me postpartum, but I didn't have a vaginal birth, I had a C-section, so it's probably a
Yeah.
big part of it. I know I have friends that still struggle with it, and their kids are many years old, so, I'll give
You
them
have a
those
whole
videos.
different set of things that you have to deal with now too, right? Like releasing that like scar tension and things like that. So definitely pelvic floor PT for everybody would be helpful.
Yeah, scar tension is, like, a real thing for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, please, I'm sure everyone wants to connect with you. Where can they find you? What's your website? What's your social media? All of that.
Yeah, so I'm like very much most active on Instagram. And my Instagram is at Tara De Leon Fitness, but there's like an underscore in between each word. So Tara underscore de underscore under Tara Leon underscore fitness. It's a terrible Instagram name. I should definitely have never picked that, knowing that I would be saying it out loud, but that's the world we live in. So definitely find me there. I don't have a website, believe it or not. Instagram is where you can get me for like everything. But if you're into like the weight neutral fitness and the intuitive eating type stuff, I have my own podcast called Wellness Rebranded. You can find it anywhere you like to listen to podcasts. Essentially, it's me, a dietitian, and a mental health therapist team up to talk about what is actual self care and what's like diet culture and toxic positivity kind of run amok. So we're always chatting about interesting stuff on the pod. And then you can find my book on Amazon. I actually have like a 12-week fitness program for postpartum in the book. The way I laid out the book was there was like funny stories, like the spider stories in there, for example. And then at the end of each chapter, there's a tool. So if you're too busy, you're too immersed in like the chaos of postpartum, you can skip the stories and just read the tool and apply that to your life like immediately. So I've got a whole workout in there if you want it. It's there for you.
Awesome. So many great resources. Your podcast sounds awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. It was great to meet you and have this conversation and just feel very seen as a new mom myself. So I appreciate you. If you are
Likewise.
listening, yeah, please send this to a new mom that you think could use it. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I will see you all on the next episode. Have a beautiful rest of your day.